True Crime 49 is an Alaskan true crime podcast, the original Gothic Veritas. Season 3, Women Hunted, traces the progression of Robert Hansen, an Alaskan serial killer known as the Butcher Baker. Listener discretion is advised. Breaking news. Horseshoe Harriet was identified as Robin Pelkey.
Oh, she was 19 years old.
She was 19 years old in 1979. How do we know that?
Robert Hansen was already incarcerated, and as they were interrogating him, they had made an agreement that they would take him by helicopter to these numerous sites if he would disclose the location of the body. In most cases, they did it in the winter, and he would place a evidence flag, and then they would return later without the liability of him running off into the bushes to actually exhume when the ground was thawed. When he showed them where the body was for Horseshoe Harriet, of course, they were always amazed that he, after years from being there, that he could place the map within, basically on the body or within 10, 15 feet of the body. Because she was a Jane Doe and he had no name or he didn't know who she was, they just gave her the nickname Horseshoe Harriet after the Horseshoe Lake. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children paid to have her body exhumed in 2014. The DNA that they were able to extract was a partial profile and it was fragmented. They were using it to compare it to other known missing people to exclude them. Yeah, and to identify them and possibly her. They were able to exclude other missing persons, but still, it still remained that she was a Jane Doe, which they gave the name Horseshoe Harriet. Took the DNA and submitted it, much as they had for many of these high-profile cases that are being solved right now, the Golden State Killer and numerous cold cases. Yeah. And they did have a filial match of a relative in Arkansas. When they were correlated it with people in the family, it was really evident very quickly that there was a young girl who essentially disappeared. She was 19 years old at the time, Robin Pelkey. And also, that really does go to give an example of what these assaults and what these victims of what it was like, because she was a 19-year-old girl.
And she was unidentified for 37 years, and nobody did a missing persons report on her. At 19 years old, you're allowed to go where you want to, and
And even if they did put a missing persons, let's say if she was in Colorado or wherever she was, even if they did missing persons in 1980, that they wouldn't be looking for a girl in Alaska.
No, that's pretty far from home. One of the things about Robert Hansen, and maybe this is why they used the moniker Horseshoe Harriet, is because he said he had a hard time with the maps as much as he could see it from above in the sky. When he was, flying over, seeing a horseshoe lake is totally evident. When you're actually on the ground, it's just a bend in the lake. So maybe coming down in the helicopter, seeing the Horseshoe hit lake, and then working your way, 15 miles south.
That's a good point, because Horseshoe Lake is accessible by road. It is very remote even today, much less back then. But it is accessible by road. He also could have accessed it through a plane in the winter, so we're not sure when exactly he went there. And I think you're right. Using the lake is small, and the lake would be difficult to land an airplane in the lake when it's frozen, and maybe not. But it's accessible by road. But the X and her were both miles from the lake.
Yeah.
So the Horseshoe Lake was like
a location marker.
Yes.
But the thing is he's not really listed on record as having a plane until the 80s. And this was 1979. And yes, it was accessible by road, and he had gotten stuck before going out in the rural Alaska at different times. It's just interesting. He just popped up on the radar as a pilot. He had to have experience beforehand. And for him to say he can notice it from the sky, but not as well from the maps. But
if one of the things about the plane that makes it so nice is that you're able to put the person, this very, very dangerous cargo, into the plane, and you're able to get them out to a spot. But you can't really travel to and fro a bunch. Either you're going to go out there and stay out there, and if you like numerous people, yes, I saw this type of a plane at that location for days on end. You might even attract the game wardens to come down and see what it is you're doing. But the idea with the plane is that the plane can get out there and drop the person off and basically have zero exposure time. No one's going to pull you over while you got the body in the plane or the live girl in the plane. But if you were then to use the plane for that benefit and get her out there, right, and you're leaving her a place that even if there's a blizzard, you can drive your truck there. So you could actually deliver the body, deliver the living girl, and then he kills her, and then actually leaves in the plane. He could then set up and drive the truck out there. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that we've been discussing too, is that when they went to Ted Bundy, and kind of placated him, and can you maybe tell us about, we're plagued by the Green River Killer, can you maybe tell us something? One of the first things that he said was, he's spending time with the bodies. He wants to go back. He will be obsessed with going back and spending time with the bodies.
Yeah.
We can only make the fair assumption that Robert Hansen would be the same way. That if the obsession is so strong that the impulse makes him do these things, that he's not going to just then walk away from this thing. He wants to
revisit.
He wants to spend time.
And that goes to show too with the wounds that a lot of his victims had. They had no bullet holes or no knife wounds on their clothes, but definitely on their body. He had redressed them. Like they were naked when they were killed. Maybe other stuff, we don't know. And then redressed. One of the things that was always interesting to me about Horseshoe Harriet, or actually Robin Pelkey, is that she had 4 knife wounds and 4 gunshots. To me, that's overkill. And that's not normally if he's like hunting them, or if they're escaping and he has to shoot them before they escape or before somebody notices. That's like a one shot, one stab. But Robin had 4 knife wounds and 4 gunshots. So there's something very specific about her, and that she was, I don't know, there was no history, like with the Green River Killer. He targeted prostitutes, and definitely towards the end, Robert Hansen targeted prostitutes. In the beginning, it was kind of good girls that he was trying to figure out his plan. But whatever it was with Robin, there was definitely more violence exhibited than you normally see.
Well, one thing that comes to mind is that there was the serial killers in Canada, the guy who owned the pig farm, and on the pig farm they found tons of shards of bone. In all of the trove of evidence that they found, one of the things was a pistol that had a dildo, a jelly type of a dildo placed over the pistol like a silencer, and that it had been fired through. So by its nature, the firing of the gun, the threat of the firing of the gun begins to become part of something more than just pointing and shooting them for the sake of killing them. The actual fear of pulling the trigger of the gun has been implemented into the sexual assault. With Robert Hansen and Horseshoe Harriet, or Robin Pelkey, but in a different way, the gun and the knife can be then implemented into the sexual assault, or the sexual element. It becomes part of the sexual element. In the case of the pig farmer, it was to gather as much terror out of these women who basically are destroyed, broken, and destroyed already, to get something more out of them. He took it to that level. With Robert Hansen, actually, the girl was actually already dead, and that by not only, of course, revisiting the body, daydreaming and fantasizing, but at some point maybe crossing his mind that recreating and restaging the original assault. And so the second and third and fourth stab wounds and second and third and fourth bullet wounds might actually be chronologically him rebuilding the setup, maybe even changing her clothes, moving her stuff around so that it appears that she's actually not dead again, and he's actually reliving the stab and reliving the shoot 4 times.
Yeah.
So there's a good possibility that he was using it to try to reinvigorate and restart and get a refresh, a flash of the assault, because he didn't want to walk away from it. He wanted to gather it as much as he could possibly.
Yeah, it's just really interesting because by that time he was already a big game hunter. He already knew what organs to hit if you were going to shoot to kill. You know, he would know what organs to stab or whatever, penetrate with your knife if you were going to just kill them. It should have been, if you're a hunter, it's one shot, one kill. Hopefully, that's what you're looking for. So for him to do it over and over again, and some of it could have been post-mortem, I kind of figured that if she was 19 and come from Colorado or Arkansas, from the lower 48, 19 in Alaska, she probably had a little bit of moxie to her and a bit of a fight. And I don't know if I want to say it here, but we just recently were reading about somebody who they emptied the clip on the guy and he never fell. So maybe, but like I said, big game hunting, you should be able to know, or to shoot somebody and it not have to do, in hunting, the more bullets you put into something, the less meat you're going to eat, and I'm not saying that about Robin, but I'm just saying.
You're definitely correct in that at some point you could say he could almost be considered like a surgeon with his firearm by then. That you're right, he would know if he wanted to end the life as quickly as possible to take away any form of danger, which that's what he would often use as an excuse. I had the gun there. They went crazy, or as he calls it, he calls it, they would panic on me, and then he would use that as a justification to shoot them. But you bring up a number of interesting points. One would be also starting from the back forward. One would be that when you look at the picture of this girl after all of this time, we never knew how old she was. We never knew what race she was, or not that that's really important, but
The color of her hair.
now that after you see her, that brings up another part of it, is that you're seeing these photos that maybe someone pulled out of an old album, but this photo was when before she would have, so it might not have been the same person in the picture, because she might have been younger at a different phase in her life, or a different phase in her life.
Yeah.
When you see her, she does not exhibit a street girl.
No.
A healthy Midwestern, Western girl, looks kind of rootin' and tootin', kind of, maybe even help change the tire if they got a flat type of a girl. The kind of 19-year-old girl that would buckle up and go to Alaska in, 1980. So you see the type of girl that would go up there and put herself into the mix. It's kind of horrible, because that's the type of that she would have to endure. She's maybe a fighter. She's got a fighting spirit. She's got some grit in her, and maybe that lends to why she has so many wounds on her.
Yeah. He goes on and he tells us all about Eklutna Annie, who's also unidentified at this point, another Jane Doe. But he tells us about her struggle, and he tells us about Joanna Messina, and Barbara Fields, kind of as because it's okay, they're like streetwalkers, or they were destitute, they were prime for the picking, they kind of deserved it. And he tells us the whole story. But he identifies where Horseshoe Harriet's body is, but does not tell the story.
And he misled them on what order she would have been in.
He even said, oh, I think maybe she was from Kodiak, which clearly she doesn't look Alaska Native at all. I'm sure her jargon and maybe her diction would have not been Alaskan.
Even if money had been brought into the equation when they met each other in the truck or out, wherever they met each other, even if money or any type of hint of prostitution would have been there, even if there was that there, it seems like is he's trying to maintain being sane. And Israel Keys says that one of the things that he regards, most of the different circles, he regards the ones highly that could live the two lives and hold the both lives together. As Robert Hansen is trying to maintain his regular life, as he's having suspicions about himself, as he's losing control, it seems that he latches on to certain things, even though it's absurd. Yes, even if there were two women over the span of 20 years, that yes, you had an accident, she panicked, but to rack up, let's say, 17 marks on the map, and he in his mind, as he's trying to hold on to these lifelines of this is how I exist and hold up the facade, he can't see the absurdity that, yes, that line might have worked if it had been one or two, maybe one every 10 years this happened twice to you over 20 years. But once you've racked up 10 of these, 11 of these, 17 of these, that line isn't going to work anymore. But and it seems that with her, that's what kind of he's doing. When if it was a regular girl, it appears his rules were, if it was a regular girl that's going to attract, the whole village is going to come after you with pitchforks because this wasn't a prostitute. He, even at the last, when everyone knows that he's a sadistic rapist, control killer, he still holds to that same thing. And I tend to believe that that's why he tried to send misinformation on the date, throw them off on who she could have been, because he didn't want any of the ones following him that were possibly a good girl, a regular girl.
When he burned down the bus barn, he said, I didn't do it, I didn't do it, I didn't do it. Enough where his father made the petition and everything went down, and he still said, I didn't do it, up until the point where he was in prison, and he realized until he said he did it, he wasn't going to get out when it was advantageous. And then he was out in 6 months after that or something.
Which is similar to like the Golden State Killer. Most recently, he's playing a facade in the courtroom, and you see that it's an absolute lie that he in his cell he has mobility, he can move around, he's acting like a regular person. And it's that same move that Robert Hansen did.
Yeah, and even though the Golden State Killer was elderly, he's still doing the same stuff that you see Robert Hansen do, and Israel Keys, and various other serial killers. But for Horseshoe Harriet, I definitely feel like I'm glad that she was identified. Robin Pelkey, I feel bad. I would like to know, there's nobody who will be able to tell us the story of why did she have 4 knife wounds? Why did she have 4 gunshots? Why did he say that she was from Kodiak? And she has beautiful red hair, and maybe she had it dyed at the time, but she doesn't look Alaska Native, And why didn't he ever say anything? He told us basically from the point of including Annie being regular to the point that she died, and he never says anything about Robin.
Well, one thing I think is, on the same way that John Douglas, when on this particular case, when they brought him the information. He said, well, he only wanted, he said, I don't want you to tell me certain things about it. I want you to, basically, he wanted to experience the evidence of the crime and the victimology. And in order to, so he could put together, come in clean.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's one thing nice about the way that this information is folding out after 37 years. By still having these unknowns, these wounds, the state that he left her, the way that he regarded her with the law enforcement, the way that the information is coming to us in these isolated, blobs, it does allow us to, it gives us a lot of room to analyze and try to look at it and correlate it with other serial killers that act similar ways, that if they have these tendencies, that it's most likely that these tendencies will show the same pattern again in this guy. It gives us hours and hours and hours of conjecture and dissecting it and analyzing it. So it gives us tons of stuff, and it allows us to have these really pure investigations trying to rebuild.
Right. And it would be interesting to find out more about Robin and her upbringing, like with Megan Emmerich, to know that she was from Delta Junction. And that was like a big thing because you kind of know what her attitude was when she, to grow up in Delta Junction, which is a total rural Alaska place, it kind of lends a little bit to her personality. To know that Joanna Messina was a trained nurse from New York, really, when you look at her picture, you can see that a little bit. And to know that Robin Pelkey was born in Colorado and her family's from Arkansas, you can see that in her picture, and it starts to build a little bit more of what it might have been like for her.
When you start talking about the personalities that you can at least kind of get out of the photos and get off the little pieces that you have from what people said about them, when you start to look at these different personalities, there might be information that you could get from that as well. It does look like on two sides. It does look like he was taking all different types of girls. But when you look at the pictures, it does seem that you can kind of start to break them into at least like 3 different chunks. With the first one, Joanna Messina and Lisa Futrell.
Mm-hmm.
Joanna Messina and Lisa Futrell, when you look at them, they appear almost the same type of a lady. They have more of a glam look to them. They have more of a, maybe like almost like more of a Charlie's Angels professional model type of like confidence and presentation in their face. And you also see a whole group of these girls that look real like almost Appalachian country girl, like farm girl, Midwest girl, not the glam, more of the Midwestern country girl, country bumpkin. There, and it seems that when and then there's also, but so it looks like it tells us a little bit maybe about his state with victimology. It does look like, and again, these are happening in different waves.
Yeah, but there was a couple of victims too that were African American or black, black prostitutes or dancers. But I mean, I would say that too is he was born in Iowa, and he spent the majority of his life there. He spent a little bit of time in California, but most of his childhood was in Iowa. So that would lend to some of that. Plus, it's Alaska, so when you're all bundled up and you're standing on the side of the road, it's only going to be, they said, like between 5 foot and 5'4", like mostly, busty. And you could definitely see when someone's wearing a winter coat, whether they're busty or not. For me personally, I feel like in Alaska, the law enforcement culture is kind of detrimental to everyday citizens. However, as a whole, they're pretty progressive as far as they just opened a missing and murdered Indigenous women's office. The FBI did. They've been working on cold cases, and the Alaska State Troopers going forward on identifying Jane Doe, Horseshoe Harriet as Robin Pelkey. Things that I'd like to see in the future are Klutna Annie is still unidentified. Roxanne Eastland, who's going to be in our next episode, we don't know where her body is. There are several X's on the map that belong to women that he never showed the state troopers where those bodies were at, and they're out there. And so there, of the 17 women he confessed to, he said up to 34, and I think there are 21 X's on the map, and several of them have yet to be found. So it would be nice to identify who Klutna Annie is, find Roxanne Eastland's body, and however many other X's are on the map. And I think that's something that Alaska law enforcement can do. And I'm grateful to the Alaska State Troopers for keeping up with it and finding Robin Pelkey, even if her family is gone or, they don't have closure. We do. So I'm grateful to know who Horseshoe Harriet is. Robin Pelkey. And she, from the picture that they have of her, that they've shown, it's sad that she's gone, but it looked like she was a really nice person.
The interesting things that I think it brings up that I will, I know personally, I will continually keep rolling them over in my mind, is that it shows how young she was. It shows that he is trying to distance himself from those particular crimes. He's trying to distance himself from it. What does that say? What does that tie to inside of him? What does it do for him? Or what does he perceive? He perceives that it's doing something for him. The wounds that he inflicted on her. This type of victim, what she represents to him, the state that he was in the segment of his life, what she represented to him, why he treated her the way he treated her, instead of treating her like he treated Barbara and taking her to the Sunrise Inn. All of the things that we're learning from looking at who this girl was, now all of a sudden gives us more terrain that we can we get to see more terrain. We get to see flashes of terrain in the dark.